with us we have Superintendent Wilcox and Samantha Mulcaster, who are here to talk about school skills building development program, the My Way program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us here tonight to talk about the School Skills Building Development Program. Just so everyone is aware, it is a 3-year initiative funded through the Ministry of Education. It is directed specifically towards students who have an ASD, and it's for students who have varying and complex challenges. We are funded for about $280,000 for the 3 years to maintain this program. And one of the key areas of focus is parent engagement. Samantha's going to talk a little bit about this. So I'd like to introduce Samantha Mulcaster. She's our new behavior transition specialist. She started this position just over a year ago. She took over when Tim McCarthy retired. She was a successful applicant for the position. She brings a wealth of knowledge and is instrumental in facilitating this program. And I think that it's made tremendous change and benefits to children in the program. And I think it'll be a very good news story. So, go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to dive right in. I am a board-certified behavior analyst, so for anyone who doesn't know what that means, we usually will give the comparable of a speech-language pathologist, master's degree, supervised practice exam that you have to pass, but is not a regulated health profession in Ontario at this point in time. I like to clarify that point. This is a pilot project that was, as Mike said, dictated by the Ministry of Education for 3 years, so from September of 2019 to June of 2022. And we had to focus on students with an ASD to increase some type of skill. So it could be a communication skill, a social skill, self-regulation skill, and we kind of targeted all of those skills at once. One of the stipulations of the program is that we can only implement it before and after school or during nutrition breaks. So we chose nutrition breaks, and I'll talk about what that looks like. So when we got this pilot project, we had to decide where to disperse the resources within the board, and we really quickly identified students with ASD who are presenting with those complex, challenging behaviors in the classroom for basically 2 reasons. One, that we have more workplace violence, which is a higher risk in the classroom, so we want to make sure we're addressing that for the staff and the students. And 2, because that's where we see the greatest gaps in learning. So the students who are having those high rates of challenging behavior are often not able to engage with classroom learning as effectively as other students, and we really wanted to reduce that and give them the same opportunity to engage in the learning. So we implemented something called the My Way program. It has a very, very long clinical name that I'm not going to try to explain to everybody, but for the sake of this presentation, I used practical functional assessment and skill-based treatment, and I'll use acronyms for SPEED of PFA and SBT as we're speaking. But there is a hot link there for anybody who wants to go and look at the significant evidence base of journal articles to support the program that we pulled from the research in order to implement it. We do individualize the program for every single student. So it is a step-by-step based program. It builds skills that are essentially the most important skills for students, for all students. So the ability to tolerate frustration and persevere, the ability to communicate your wants and needs and have them met effectively in a trusting relationship with adults around you. The important part of this is that it's a zero risk process, so I'll explain what that looks like. One of the reasons it's zero risk is that it's trauma informed. So the basic way I can explain that for this particular process is that it's student led. So the student shows us what they need so we can effectively treat their challenging behavior. So safety is a priority, giving the student complete choice over their environment is a priority. They are part of the programming when we're designing the programming, and our goal is to support them to be able to communicate more effectively so we can start to build those skills and kind of decrease any defensiveness that we're seeing from those students in the classroom. So the goals, there are a lot. In short term, we want to prioritize televisability and understanding. So those are 2 of the really foundational features of this program. A lot of times for students with significant challenging behavior, there is a lot of back and forth of control between the students and the adults in the classroom. And the goal of this program is to say we can't change your behavior until we understand it. So typically in more traditional behavioral applications, you would be saying, okay, a student is having challenging behavior. What is it that they're trying to get access to or get away from? This program sees that a student is always engaging in challenging behavior to get themselves back to a point of happy, relaxed, and engaged. So that can look like a lot of things, but happy, relaxed, and engaged is what we all want. All students, all adults, we all want to be happy, relaxed, and engaged. So we prioritize that at the start of the program. We assess behavior from that trauma-informed lens, so it's student-led, safety first. Our first short-term goal is to achieve zero challenging behavior, so that risk is ameliorated right from the beginning, and it stays that way for the entire program. We then look at tolerance to instructions and denials. So that's tolerance, not compliance. We're not trying to build compliance from students right off the bat. We're just trying to introduce some things like being told no, or being given an instruction that might typically be a trigger for challenging behavior, and see them be successful with that. And then the last short-term goal is to increase their success in the classroom with progressively higher expectations. So we go at their speed, small steps, so we can have like great experiences at the end. In the long term, the ability to turn off behavior, to put it to zero levels, and increase that success also allows relationships to be made between the people in the classroom and that student. So with peers, with staff, with their entire school environment, threat level 0, they're really allowed to build positive relationships. I was actually at a school today where a dad came to pick up one of the students in this program and said that for the first time ever, she's so excited to go to school every day. Like, she can't wait to get in the car to go to school because it's a happy, relaxed, and engaged environment. So that's awesome. We get to fade how constant we have support staff with those students because they're able to have more independence, increase their learning, and most importantly, address those gaps in learning that they have because of their challenging behavior getting in the way. So we start with that happy, relaxed, and engaged. And instead of considering a student engaging in behavior to meet one specific need, we consider that they are trying to get out of something they don't want to do to gain access to something they do want to do with engagement from the people that they like. So it's kind of a huge package. And when we're explaining that to staff teams, we try to explain that if you had earned your lunch break and I said, okay, it's time for your lunch break. Do you want your food or your cell phone? Or you can have a peer go and sit with you, but you can't have all of it. You would not be very happy, relaxed, and engaged on your lunch break. All of those things are part of that package of reinforcement. So we want to give our students that too, that whole package of what it looks like for them to be HRE, happy, relaxed, and engaged. So we make every decision through evidence and data, which I will show you as we go through the presentation. So there's an assessment to determine eligibility for the program. And what we're looking for in this assessment is that the student can be happy, relaxed, and engaged at school, that we can actively achieve that for the student because that's that foundational basis for learning. So in this process, and I'm going to just really quickly overview it because the brass tacks aren't as important, but we do interviews with all of the staff, teachers, and parents to determine what are all of those preferred things to get that student happy, relaxed, and engaged. And then we set up an open door situation right in the classroom. We have occasionally done it in a separate room in the school if needed. If that student's happy, relaxed, engaged looks like we're playing Queen, We Will Rock You on repeat really loudly, we won't do that right in the classroom, which we have done. So sometimes we'll start it out of the classroom, but it always gets back to the classroom. And the door is always open because the idea is if you are meeting that student's every need and they're happy, relaxed, and engaged, they're not going to want to leave. So the door is open. They can leave if they want to. And if they do leave, it means we've missed something in setting up the environment properly. We play. We have a really great time in that situation. And then myself or the other BCBA who we have in the board who would run this program place a really quick instruction. So, okay, let's put all this away. We can't keep playing today. And as soon as we see any indicator that that student is not happy with that, they might make a sad face. They might start to say no. They might flick their hand. We immediately say, oh, you don't want to go. You want to keep playing. Let's stay here. And we go right back to that. So we do that back and forth about 5 times just to make sure that we can kind of keep the student in a happy, relaxed, and engaged state, but also know that we know exactly what would turn behavior on as well. So there has been only one time so far in this process a student wasn't successful, and I'll tell you kind of how that actually helps us. So this is a very complicated looking graph of what this process looks like, but just so you can see the data. So that top 2 lines is when the student's engaged in that reinforcement. You can see at the bottom, there's a short dashed line and then a diamond. That means that we gave an instruction and the student had that they showed us they did not want to do it. They said no, and we went right back to reinforcement, and that kind of shows that on and off, that we have environmental control of the behavior, that we can keep the student happy, relaxed, and engaged at school, and that's what we want. We want them to be happy. We want them engaging with us. We want them not to feel like there's a threat. And then if they're successful, we move to the skill-based intervention. So there's 5 phases, which I will briefly review because you guys don't need to know the, detailed clinical pieces. I'll show you how we use data to evaluate the success of the student. The program is typically 6 to 8 weeks. We've run the whole thing in less than 5 weeks with one really quick student. And we also had one student that took 12 weeks because of COVID-19 kind of pausing us in the middle. The program has to be written by a BCBA, so myself or our other BCBA in the board. And we hired ABA facilitators to work directly with the students during nutrition break. So they model the skills, they work directly with the student, and then the staff in the actual classroom work with the student the rest of the day running the program. So our pilot project requirement of nutrition break only is met, but the staff are also developing the capacity to run the program all day long. So this is kind of what the program looks like from a phase basis. So that foundation of happy, relaxed, and engaged, that's always where we're starting. Phase 1 is where we teach the student to say or indicate, I want it my way. And that is the whole entire phase 1 of the program. We will be happy, relaxed, and engaged and say, okay, it's time to go do some work. The student says, I want it my way. Okay, you can have it your way. We're not going to go do any work. So the days are super fun and super happy constantly, and there's a lot of positive relationship development happening. Sometimes there's 2 parts to that phase because we will teach the student to say, excuse me, I want it my way, please, or to go tap someone on the shoulder to gain their attention so that we have some appropriate skill building. Phase 2 is introducing the word no. So we start saying no, but we don't follow through on it. The no is just there to kind of desensitize them. We teach them to say something like, that's cool, and then we say, wow, you took that so well, you can have it your way. So they're hearing that word no, and it's a positive thing and not a negative thing, so we don't have this explosive behavior. And when we're doing that, and this is the key to the program, we're still giving it to them their way immediately 60% of the time. So the program continues to progress based on the idea that the my way and having all of your happy, relaxed, and engaged given to you immediately is like the jackpot on the slot machine. And as we progress, you're always sometimes going to have that response from the people around you. So it builds this trust and compliance and the motivation that the kids keep using that skill, because sometimes they won't have to do anything and it's going to be their way. And sometimes they have to do a few things, but their needs will be met by the end irrespective. Phase 3, we give simple requests. So we're going to say no. They say that's cool or okay, or we've done a couple different things, and we'll give them something really easy like, oh, can you just shut the door? Okay, now you can have it your way. So really simple instructions. Then we move to phase 4. So more complex instructions, those would be classroom work. So it might be a worksheet or an activity that the teachers and support staff are looking for IEP goals. And we're still giving my way right away 30% of the time on a variable schedule so the student doesn't kind of know when to expect that. And phase 5 is everlasting, where we're giving multiple instructions in a row. So it might be first you have to go to circle, then you have to go work with your teacher. We're going to go out for recess. Now you can have it your way. And they participated in 2 hours of the school day without problematic behavior. And that leads to all of these other skills that can be met because now the student has trust in the school system, in their adults, in their peers, and the fact that their needs will be met consistently, always, all the time. So we've had incredible success with it. We use data to make every decision. So these graphs look complicated, and the words on the bottom don't have to mean anything to you. But just to show you guys that it's not just, oh, we think the student's ready for the next phase. When we see them being 80% of the time independent in saying, I want it my way, or accepting no, or following through with instruction, over 2 days, then we move to the next phase. So this graph shows you every time you see a new color, we've introduced the next phase. And I picked this student's graph in particular because you can see where the green line starts in the first graph. That's when we started to introduce those complex demands. So novel IEP goals, things he could not ever do before, and COVID happened. So we had to stop. And we actually brought the parents in and taught the parents how to run the program to prepare them for the March break. which they then carried forward through the entire time. And he came back to school, which is the second graph, and the skills were still there. So he's closed now. We're not with him anymore because he's doing so well. But you can see how his green line continues, as do all of the others, pretty successfully across the board. And that dark blue line across the bottom the whole way through is how frequently you're seeing challenging behavior. So 0 to near 0 levels. And these are for students that maybe could not make it through the day before. And then we also compare to baseline levels of challenging behavior. So this student was hurting themselves sometimes 100 times per hour. And once we started treatment, it went down to near 0 levels and stayed there. And we end the treatment by telling the caregivers and the teaching staff to say yes when you can and no when you can't. Because the idea is that by that end time, students are able to progress to a point where it's a natural setting of reinforcement. A lot of us can have it our way sometimes, and not all the time. And sometimes people tell us no, and then they kind of let it go. Sometimes the requests are big, sometimes they're small. It's a much more natural schedule of reinforcement for most people. So this is kind of how we leave things, and we do a follow-up at the 8-week and 12-week mark to make sure things are continuing to do well. We also bring in the parents. So the way we've done that is we have a meeting with the parents where they review videos of their child at all the different phases with the school team, and then they observe in the classroom. And then I sit down with them and pretend to be the student, and they give me instructions, and we practice to make sure they feel confident that they know how to do it. And then we actually bring them directly into the classroom to step in behind staff. We had one student who would say my way in order to have staff hold his hands. He just really needed to have his hands held. And we actually had parents like slide in behind him. So when he did it, parents were the ones who turned around, and he was so happy to see his parents there. Everyone was crying. It was great. And then we move it into the home environment, and we help them continue it at home as well. So it's the skills are transferring across environments in a really beautiful way. And usually the students are already at phase 5 at this point. So parents don't have to start at the beginning. They can right away start giving instructions, and the kids pick it up really quickly. And we provided the COVID-19 support, and we are providing virtual learning support to 2 students who are in the program. So we've done this program with 6 students since January. We did 1 unofficially before we hired the EBA facilitator, so I didn't include his data. We have 3 additional students currently in phase 1, and actually between last week and this week, we started 2 more students. I started a student today, so I didn't include those new students either. But from those initial 6, the cumulative workplace violence reports coming in, where the staff were actually made contact in workplace violence, were 104, and that was just for last year. Afterwards, we've only had 6 for those 6 students in total. So a really significant decrease in violent incident reports, and that was a huge thing for us to see in terms of safety of students and of staff. 3 of the students in the program had previously been on modified days, so they were at school for 1, 2, or 3 hours a day. All of them are in full day attendance now since the project and are able to maintain at school. 1 student who was in a Riften chair throughout the day because of periods of behavior that required him to be unsafe, we were able to consult with his occupational therapist and actually remove that support for different parts of the day so he's able to operate freely in the classroom without problematic behavior. And then 1 student who was unsuccessful with that assessment, it was actually really helpful because a lot of time when we're seeing students who have significant challenging behavior, we're looking at our community resources. We really want their support. And this allows us to say, hey, we really actually can't meet this student's needs at school. We cannot get them happy, relaxed, and engaged at school. They need something we can't give. So it allowed us to make a really appropriate referral to community resources where we've truly exhausted every option, where we can't have success in school for whatever reason. And that it's nice to almost be able to ensure that we've given every possible option. And then we also have done it with many other students. So we do have 2 students who don't have ASD we've run this program with now outside of the pilot project because we've seen such wonderful results. We've done it with 1 student who had a significant trauma history. So for that student, happy, relaxed, engaged looked like no one behind him and no one could approach from certain areas. We had to arrange the environment very specifically to maintain happy, relaxed, and engaged. We've had a range of IQ levels. We've had verbal students, nonverbal students, students of, I think we've gone not to the secondary sector yet, but all the way up to grade 7. So JK to grade 7, and students in a spec ed classroom as well as not in a spec ed classroom. So we would like to find ways to make whole classroom-based approaches with this, and we're doing that a bit. We've had 2 teachers who had this program for a student ask us, is there ways we can implement elements of this to our entire class to reduce classroom behavior across the board and help build those positive relationships? So we've done that a little bit. We're going to see what the success level of that is. We currently have 72 students on caseload. We also have, a mild wait list, but we know that there is a number of students, even those who most don't have autism, who would be a really good candidate for this program, where it would give us the best rates of success for a lot of those students in a really safe and risk-free way. Various profiles and diagnoses, and we have behaviors on our caseload list that range from verbal noncompliance to violence to aggression to severe self-injury, and even students who are just, oppositional when work demands are placed could benefit from a program like this. There is some research to support doing it with students who have no special education connections, no diagnoses of sorts, but are just struggling with either trauma or opposition. Probably not enough research that we would go in that direction yet, but it's coming, and that's really helpful. And then we're currently prioritizing the program for the most at-risk students, so those students who are on the modified day, who are really struggling to connect with their learning. Thanks. Questions?
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. Do we have any questions from trustees?
I have a question, Burgess.
Go ahead, Trustee Burgess.
What a great presentation. My question is, it looks very successful. I'm thrilled about particularly the safety for our staff and safety for parents. You did mention something about, over the summer while COVID was in place, empowering and training and helping build capacity within families and parents taking over, et cetera. I'm wondering if you gleaned any specific things about that. And my real question is, beyond the pilot, how do we sustain this program? Do we need to advocate for funding? What do you think will happen once the pilot is finished?
So at this point, we actually this year hired 2 additional ABA facilitators outside of the pilot funding so that we could continue to run the program with students who are appropriate and continue to see them gain success. So we are running it outside of the pilot project now, and we do have some additional staff in order to do that at a greater rate. There's still just myself and one other BCBA, so we're slightly limited, but in general, we're able to do it much more now that we have additional staff. And I think that as we see the success of this, the hope is that they'll extend the pilot as a whole or make it a more permanent program that we can run more frequently. But I don't think that there is any plan for us to not continue with this approach to the students that we're working with, because it's really an approach that we've been doing under the guise of the pilot project. But we can continue the approach even if we don't necessarily have those guidelines in place.
Do you have any follow-up, Trustee Burgess?
Well, specifically, I'm wondering how it impacts our special education funding.
So the 2 positions, the ABA facilitators, we used the student support money to hire those positions for this time, so that it is a very sustainable program in the sense that the funding for the program is actually about $280,000 for 3 years. And while we are building, I think it's important because Samantha touched on the fact that we're building staff capacity all the time. So even if the funding for this ends, I certainly can see where if we have a plan in place, we can certainly build sustainability that will continue. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from trustees? I have one. There was on one of your slides you mentioned that classroom teachers are asking for some of these skills to be able to implement in their classrooms. I'm wondering if you can talk a little more about some of the those circumstances, maybe some of those examples on what they're doing, and kind of building on Trustee Burgess's question about building capacity, and then allowing students outside of the pilot and students outside of the ASD spectrum to benefit from this as well?
Yeah, so we've done it a couple different ways in terms of teachers who are requesting that support. Without consent, obviously we wouldn't make any student-specific recommendations, so we make them on a whole classroom basis. So some of the inherent elements of the program that we can pull into a whole classroom program are really helpful. So things like the idea and general concept of happy, relaxed, and engaged being multiple things at once and not a choice of you can have this or this or this. So building in some reinforcement systems that are whole classroom based, where students are can do some of their work to access a package of reinforcement instead of individual reinforcers that are more staff controlled, and looking and saying, what is that need? So we've worked a lot with some of those classrooms to say at the beginning of every day, just play for a bit and see what these students want and need. What are the things that they're including in their package of reinforcers, and how can you get them happy, relaxed, and engaged? And if they're not happy, relaxed, and engaged, consider whether this is a good time to place a demand that is typically not something that they're going to have success with. And then we've also considered the idea of that variable schedule. So I talked about that slot machine idea. So when it's time to say, check your schedule to go to the next activity, and a student is coming up to their schedule saying, oh my gosh, you cleaned up and came and checked your schedule so well, you can go back and play for 5 more minutes. So just to recognize that they've done something really well, and intermittently just not even maintain the expectation so that they continue to be motivated. So we call them surprise shorties, but it's like, surprise, we're not actually going to make you follow through. We're so happy. And that's what we call them for the entire program. But in this context, we're setting it up so that the whole classroom gets that. So I was in one of those classrooms the other day, yesterday, and a student who typically has trouble leaving gym class came into the line, and the whole entire class stopped and had like a 30-second dance party for this student coming into the line without problematic behavior, which is really exciting. They won't do it every time, but occasionally he gets to be really special and have this super fun time. And then the teacher said, wow, this all went so well. You guys can all go back and play for a few more minutes. And then they all came back really nicely again, and they walked to class and went to do their work. So it's just trying to build in that, instead of trying to kind of be more dictative in the way that we're running a classroom, looking at how can we make it a really joyful experience, because that happy, relaxed, and engaged is like rocket fuel for learning. No one learns when they're not in that state. That's how we kind of build. So trying to build that capacity is already having an impact.
That's fascinating. I'm glad that you mentioned that about the learning environment, because I mean, when you're talking about it, and I'm hearing, okay, the student did something, and then we say, oh, okay, it's fine to go and do that. It's counter to what we think of a classroom experience should look like, or classroom management should look like. And then to see the success rate, not only in the classroom, but then further to home, and how much that changes not only the student's home environment, but how they return back to school and how they are around their peers. I think it's fascinating. Any other questions? Oh, Trustee Halberstadt, always following me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a congratulations. It's amazing the results you're getting, like going from 104 with workplace violence to 6. Is this a new science? The happy, relaxed, and engaged. And if it is, are we leading the way on it? Or I guess there's other pilot schools too, or pilot boards, but
so
this is a new science, is it not?
It is. So traditional behavior modification techniques are that people kind of associate with students with challenging behavior are usually not so open-minded and don't usually start with that foundational happy, relaxed, and engaged. Current applied behavior analysis is very much focused on that. So the science of behavior has moved in that direction of starting with meeting the student's needs and creating goals that are within what the student can do at this very moment, and not pushing past that point until you've built a trusting relationship. And some of the old science that would maybe not be helpful for continuing to have that relationship is no longer considered best practice. Within this particular model, it's been around for just over 6 years now. There started to be enough research for it to be kind of a wider thing. and it was introduced by a man named Dr. Hanley, and he's very, very wonderful. It is not something that's happening in schools everywhere. It is traditionally a clinical program that's introduced in a clinical setting, because there are those students where they're happy, relaxed, and engaged is something that we can't safely do at school. And in a clinic, you could. Doing it in the school environment has challenges, but there's enough research for us to go through and figure out the best ways to do it in the school environment. The pilot project is so broad that every school is doing it differently. We are certainly doing the most clinical application, and we, I think, are the only pilot project that was presented at the last meeting I went to that was focusing on this particular group of students. So a lot of the other school boards are doing things like groups where over nutrition break, a bunch of students who maybe are in a mainstream classroom with ASD come together and work on social skills, which is excellent, wonderful. We just really wanted to prioritize this need because it was such a great need for us, and it's been working out really, really well. It is a program we were implementing occasionally with individual students as they came on our caseload if we felt that we didn't have much else to offer. And we were really successful with it prior to starting it as the pilot project, but this just allowed us to have the foundation to really grow the program and do it in a really nice way with additional support.
Thank you again. Great job.
Any other questions from trustees? Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Mike. We appreciate that presentation. Thank you very much. That was excellent.